June 25th, 1876, the sun blazes over the greasy grass, where a lone warrior, Crazy Horse, stares down 600 U.S. soldiers, with just 1,500 Lakota and Cheyenne at his back. Against all odds, he charges, and by dusk, Custer's 7th Cavalry lies defeated, one of the greatest native victories ever. Yet within a year, that same warrior is betrayed, stabbed under a flag of truce, his body hidden in a secret grave. Now think of a huge mountain, 563 feet tall and 641 feet wide, way bigger than Mount Rushmore, being carved to honor Crazy Horse, all starting with a letter from Chief Henry Standing Bear to Korchak Zukowski on May 19, 1939. How does this massive monument show the resilience and identity of Native people? And what makes it a living dream for their culture across generations? On May 19, 1939, a Lakota chief named Henry Standing Bear wrote a letter to a sculptor named Korchak Zukowski. He hadn't met Korchak yet, but his words carried weight. My fellow chiefs and I would like the white man to know the red man has great heroes also. That letter started a partnership that led to the world's largest mountain sculpture, standing 563 feet high and stretching 641 feet long. It's bigger than Mount Rushmore, a project that would take decades to unfold. The purpose was set before the first blast happened on June 3, 1948. This wasn't just about carving a rock. It was about telling the story of North America's indigenous people. Chief Standing Bear wanted to show their culture and heroes in a positive light, not the usual negative spin from history books. That blast marked the beginning of something big, a way to honor Native voices at a time when they were often ignored. It took guts to push for this in 1948, and it showed in every step that followed. Chief Standing Bear had the vision first. He grew up Lakota, attended Carlisle Indian School as one of its earliest Native students, and learned that survival for his people meant using words and ideas instead of weapons. He reached out to Korchak Zukowski, a self-taught sculptor from Boston with Polish roots. Korchak had already built a solid career back east, even helping Gutzon Borglum on Mount Rushmore in the summer of 1939. That same year, he won a prize at the New York World's Fair for his marble portrait, Paderewski's Study of an Immortal. Standing Bear read about that win and decided Korchak was the one to make this happen. Korchak's wife, Ruth, joined later and helped turn the idea into something real. They didn't stop with the mountain. Their work grew to include the Indian Museum of North America and the Indian University of North America, places to preserve Native history and educate young people. This project wasn't a quick job. It's been carried on by their family and others for generations. When Standing Bear's letter arrived, Korchak was finishing a 13.5-foot statue of Noah Webster in Connecticut. Then World War II started, and he served in the Army, getting wounded at Omaha Beach in 1944. After the war, he could have stayed in Europe to build memorials, but he chose the Black Hills instead. He felt the story of Native people, who'd lived there for maybe 150,000 years, needed to be told, and he saw it as a privilege to help. This project is more than a giant sculpture. Even though its size is impressive at 563 feet tall and 641 feet wide, it's a symbol of something deeper. For Native people, it stands for resilience and identity, a way to hold on to their roots after years of hardship. Standing Bear didn't want handouts or sympathy. He wanted recognition for his people's strength. Korchak didn't take this on for fame. He saw it as a duty. When they chose that 600-foot mountain in the Black Hills, a place sacred to the Lakota, they weren't just planning to carve Crazy Horse. They were building a lasting mark of Native survival. The museum and university tie it all together, keeping the culture alive and giving the next generation a chance to learn their history. So yes, it's a monument, but it's also a quiet stand to say Native heroes and their stories deserve a place in the world. So who was Crazy Horse, the guy this whole mountain is about? He was born around 1840 near Rapid Creek in the Black Hills of South Dakota, part of the Oglala Lakota tribe. Back then, he didn't start out with the name we know him by. They called him Curly, probably because of his wavy hair, something that stood out among his people. He grew up learning the traditional Lakota ways, training to be a warrior from a young age. That early life shaped him into the leader he'd become. Later, after he proved himself in battle, He took on his father's name, Shunkawitko, which translates to his horse is crazy. It's a name that stuck because of how fearless and wild he was in a fight. Fast forward to June 25th, 1876. That's when Crazy Horse led one of the most famous battles in American history, the Battle of Little Bighorn. He had about 1,500 to 2,000 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors with him, facing off against 600 soldiers from Custer's 7th Cavalry Regiment. The odds weren't in his favor, but he didn't flinch. They fought along the Little Bighorn River, a place Native people call the greasy grass because of how the wet grass shined in the sun. By the end of June 26, Custer and his men were wiped out. It wasn't just a win, it was a statement. For Native Americans, this battle showed they could stand up to a bigger, better-armed force and come out on top. Some still talk about it as one of their proudest moments. But that victory didn't mean the fight was over. Just over a year later, on September 5th, 1877, Crazy Horse's story took a dark turn. He'd been resisting the U.S. government's push to force his people onto reservations. Things got tense, and he agreed to meet at Fort Robinson in Nebraska under a flag of truce. It was supposed to be a talk, a chance to sort things out. Instead, it went sideways. The negotiations got messy. Some say the translators botched the words. Others say it was a setup. As soldiers tried to lock him up, Crazy Horse pulled a knife to break free. His friend Little Big Man grabbed him to stop the struggle. And in that chaos, an infantry guard lunged with an 18-inch bayonet. The blade hit deep, and Crazy Horse didn't make it. He was only about 37 years old. His parents took his body away and buried him somewhere secret. To this day, no one knows exactly where he rests. There's more to him than just battles, though. Crazy Horse had this saying, "I will return to them in stone." It wasn't just talk. He carried a stone talisman in his ear for protection, a little piece of rock that meant something big to him. Korchak even put that detail into the scale models for the memorial, a nod to the warrior's own words. Some Lakota saw it as a prophecy, like he knew his story wouldn't end with his death. And when you look at the mountain today, 563 feet tall with his face taking shape, it's hard not to wonder if he was right. Here's the bigger picture. That win at Little Bighorn was huge, a symbol of Native strength against all odds. But it didn't come cheap. The U.S. government hit back hard after that, rounding up tribes like the Lakota and Cheyenne who wouldn't give in. They tightened the grip, pushing people off their land and onto reservations. Crazy Horse kept fighting until the end, but his death marked a turning point. It showed how even a big triumph could spark bigger trouble. For Native people, he's not just a warrior. He's proof they could hold their own, even if the cost was steep. That's the man they're carving into the Black Hills, a reminder of what he stood for and what they lost. Now let's talk about the two men who made this dream real, Chief Henry Standing Bear and Korchak. They came from totally different worlds, but their paths crossed to create something massive. First, there's Standing Bear, born in 1874 to the Brule Lakota. He lived until 1953, spending most of his life working for his people. When he was just a teenager, around 1879, he became one of the first Native Americans to attend Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. It was a tough place, built to civilize Native kids, but Standing Bear turned it into a chance to learn. While there, he picked the name Henry from a random list, a small detail that stuck with him. That experience shaped how he saw the world. He realized fighting for Lakota survival didn't mean bows and arrows anymore. It meant mastering words, ideas, and skills from the non-native world to protect his culture. Later, as a hereditary chief, he put that belief into action, speaking out and writing to push for native rights. Then there's Korchak, born on September 6, 1908, in Boston to Polish parents. He lived until October 20th, 1982, and his story is just as unique. Korchak didn't go to art school or train under some famous master. He taught himself how to sculpt, starting with whatever he could get his hands on. By 1939, he'd built a solid career in New England, making statues for people who could pay. That summer, he got a call to help Gutzon Borglum, the guy behind Mount Rushmore, with some of the carving work. It was a big deal for a self-made artist. Later that year, he entered a marble portrait called Paderewski Study of an Immortal at the New York World's Fair and won first prize by public vote. That win put his name in the papers, and that's how Standing Bear found him. A Lakota chief reading about a Polish sculptor from Boston, it's not the kind of connection you'd expect. Korchak's life took some turns after that. When World War II broke out, he was busy carving a 13-high-foot statue of Noah Webster in Connecticut, finishing it between 1941 and 1943. Then he volunteered for the Army. On June 6, 1944, he landed at Omaha Beach during D-Day and got wounded in the fighting. After the war ended in 1945, European officials asked him to stay and sculpt war memorials. He could have made a good living there, but he said no. Instead, he headed to the Black Hills in 1946 to work on Standing Bear's project. Why? He believed the story of Native people, who'd been on that land for maybe 150,000 years, deserved something permanent. To him, carving a mountain for them wasn't just a job, it was an honor. There's a strange twist to their story that tied them together even more. Korchak was born on September 6, 1908, just a day off from when Crazy Horse died on September 5, 1877, 31 years earlier. The Lakota elders noticed that coincidence and saw it as a sign. To them, it wasn't random, it was destiny. They believed Korchak was meant to carve Crazy Horse into that mountain. Standing Bear even pushed the idea when they met, pointing out how the dates lined up. It gave the whole thing a deeper meaning, like the past and present were linking up. Their perspectives shaped the project in big ways. Standing Bear wasn't just after a monument. He saw education as the key to a better future for Native Americans. That's why he wanted more than rock. He wanted schools and museums to go with it. Korchak, on the other hand, brought the hands-on drive. He felt privileged to tell a story that stretched back thousands of years, one that hadn't been told right before. Together, they didn't just plan a sculpture, they laid the groundwork for something that could outlast them both. Standing Bear brought the why, Korchak brought the how, and the Black Hills became the where. It's a partnership that still echoes today. In May 1947, Korchak Joukowsky showed up in the Black Hills ready to start from scratch. He pitched a tent and lived in it for 7 months, surrounded by nothing but pine trees and open land. There was no electricity, no running water, and no money to lean on. He didn't sit around waiting for help, though. He grabbed an axe, started chopping down those trees, and built himself a log home. Then he carved out rough roads to get around. This was a man who'd survived D-Day. A lack of comforts wasn't going to slow him down. Everything he did those first months was about laying the groundwork for something much bigger. The year before, in 1946, he'd walked the Black Hills with Chief Henry Standing Bear, scouting for the perfect spot. They picked a 600-foot mountain, a place the Lakota had held sacred for generations. Korchak first thought he'd carve just the top 100 feet, but Standing Bear saw it differently. They decided to use the whole mountain, shaping it into a sculpture 563 feet high and 641 feet long. It was a huge commitment, not just in size, but in meaning. They wanted it to reflect the full story of Native people, not just a piece of it. That choice set the stage for decades of work. The first real step came on June 3, 1948, with an explosion that shook loose 10 tons of rock. Korchak had drilled the holes himself, and he stood there with Standing Bear and South Dakota Governor George T. Nicholson to set it off. 5 survivors of the Battle of Little Bighorn were in the crowd, watching history connect to the present. That blast wasn't much in the grand scheme, but it marked the moment the dream broke into reality. It showed they were serious about this. From 1949 to 1956, Korchak threw himself into the labor. He worked alone at first, drilling holes 3 to 4 feet deep with a hammer and steel bar. The mountain had a 741-step staircase he'd built, and he climbed it daily, loaded with gear. He'd carry 50 pounds of dynamite on one shoulder and hold 8 to 14-foot steel bars in his hand, with drill bits looped around his neck. He'd picked up a beat-up 24-year-old compressor that weighed 4 tons, running a 2,440-foot pipeline from the base to the top. That thing broke down constantly. Some days he'd climb partway up, hear it choke out, and trudge back down to restart it. One time he made that trip 9 times in a single day. It was exhausting, but he kept at it. Ruth Ross arrived in June 1947, a volunteer who'd known Korchak from his Connecticut days. She stayed, marrying him on November 26, 1950, and they built a life together. They had 10 kids, 5 boys and 5 girls, who all got involved. The boys helped haul equipment up the mountain, while the girls worked with Ruth to handle visitors below. To keep things going, they started a dairy farm and a lumber mill on the property, bringing in money when funds were tight. Twice, in the 1960s and 1970s, the government offered them $10 million to fund the project. They said no both times. They didn't want anyone else calling the shots. There were rough moments, too. In the 1970s, one of Korchak's sons was driving a bulldozer on a mountain road when the brakes gave out. The machine plunged 70 feet, rolling past Korchak working below. The kid jumped clear, landing in a soft dirt pile, and got up, brushing himself off. Korchak looked over and said, "You got it in there, you get it out." That toughness ran deep. He and Ruth believed in doing it themselves, not relying on handouts. They saw this as more than a sculpture. It was about keeping native culture and education at the heart of it all. Government money might have sped things up, but they worried it'd dilute the mission. So they stuck to their way, building a dream from the ground up, one hard-earned piece at a time. Korchak Joukowski's time ran out on October 20th, 1982. He'd poured decades into the Crazy Horse Memorial, but he knew he wouldn't see it finished. When he died, he left behind 3 planning books and detailed scale models, tools for whoever came next. Ruth, his wife, stepped up to lead. In 1984, she faced a big call. Korchak had planned to carve the horse's head first, but the mountain wasn't ready for that. The rock in front of Crazy Horse's face was closer to being workable. She chose to focus there instead, a decision that took 2 years to settle on. It paid off. Between 1988 and 1998, the face emerged, 87 feet 6 inches tall, cut sharp against the Black Hills sky. That decade marked the first finished piece of the sculpture, a sign the dream was still alive. Work didn't stop there. In 1998, a blast near Crazy Horse's left index finger shifted the focus downward. The crew started blocking out the massive horse's head, which will stretch 219 feet when done. The outstretched left arm, reaching 243 feet long, and the hand, 33 feet high, came into view too. This wasn't small stuff. Over the 2000s and 2010s, they hauled away millions of tons of rock, blasting and bulldozing benches into the mountainside. Each cut brought the shape closer, but it's slow going. The scale is huge, and every move has to be right. Ruth stayed in charge through it all, guiding the project as CEO of the Crazy Horse Memorial Foundation. She kept it on track until her own passing on May 21, 2014, leaving a legacy as steady as the stone they carved. Now it's the second and third generations of the Joukowski family keeping things moving. Their kids and grandkids grew up with this mountain, and they're not rushing it. Today, the work is about precision. Finishing touches take time, because a mistake could set them back years. They measure twice, survey constantly, and cut carefully. Millions of visitors stop by each year, some bringing their own kids after coming as children themselves. They see the progress, the face done, the arm and horse's head taking shape. It's not just a tourist spot. It's a living project. The family and crew know it might take another century to wrap up. Korchak once said, "Time is relative," and they're living by that. 100 years isn't much when you're building something this big. Here's what it all means. This monument isn't just about Crazy Horse, though he's the figure they're carving. It stands for the spirit of all Native Americans, a symbol of their grit and pride. Standing Bear wanted that from the start. He told Korchak it should honor every tribe, every story. The face up there, 87 feet tall, isn't one man. It's a whole people looking out over the land they've held for thousands of years. The slow pace doesn't faze the crew. They'll finish it, even if it's not in their lifetime. That's the point. It's bigger than any one person. It's about carrying a promise forward, proving Native history won't fade away. The mountain's changed since Korchak's tent days. What started with a single hammer and a busted compressor is now a full operation, with heavy equipment and a clear plan. Ruth's choice to carve the face first gave people something to see, a milestone that kept the vision alive. Now, as they chip away at the horse's head and arm, it's clear this isn't a rush job. It's a craft, a tribute built to last. The family still turns down outside cash to keep it their own, just like Korchak and Ruth did. For them, it's personal. For Native people, it's a marker of who they are. And for anyone watching, it's proof that some things are worth waiting for, no matter how long it takes. The Crazy Horse Memorial is more than a mountain getting carved up. It's grown into something bigger, with the Indian Museum of North America and the Indian University of North America right there on site. The museum holds nearly 11,000 artifacts, everything from old photographs to detailed sculptures. These aren't just random objects sitting on shelves. They tell the story of Native history and culture, piece by piece. You've got items from different tribes, showing how they lived, what they made, and what they passed down. It's a collection that spans centuries, giving a real look at the diversity of American Indian life. Visitors walk through and see more than displays. They see a past that's still speaking today. Then there's the Indian University of North America, which got going in 2009. It started with two big boosts. The T. Denny Sanford Foundation gave $2.5 million to build a facility where students could live and learn. On top of that, Muffy and Paul Kristen pitched in a $5 million endowment to keep the education efforts funded for good. This isn't your typical college setup. It's built to help Native students succeed, offering support that goes beyond just classes. They get help transitioning from high school, finishing their degrees, and then heading back to work for their tribes. You can see it in the student workers around the memorial. They're not just earning a paycheck. They're growing into leaders who take what they've learned home. It's practical, hands-on, and tied straight to the community. People play a big part in keeping this alive, too. Thousands visit every year, and it's not just one-time trips. Grandparents who came decades ago bring their kids, and now those kids bring their own children. It's become a tradition for some families, a chance to check on the mountain's progress and soak in the story. They don't just watch from the sidelines, they feel connected to it. A visitor might stand on the porch and say, "My parents brought me here when I was little, and now I'm showing my kid." That's not an accident. The place pulls people in, making them part of something ongoing. They leave with more than photos. They carry a piece of the mission with them. This all ties back to what Chief Henry Standing Bear and Korchak Joukowsky wanted from the start. Education was at the core of their vision. Standing Bear spent his life pushing for Native progress, believing knowledge was the way forward. Korchak agreed, seeing the memorial as a tool to teach, not just impress. The museum and university make that real. The artifacts in the museum bring Native spirit back to life, showing anyone who walks through what these cultures have endured and achieved. The university takes it further, giving young Native people the tools to keep that spirit going. It's not about nostalgia, it's about building for now and tomorrow. Together, these pieces do something powerful. The museum's 11,000 items aren't locked away in storage. They're out there, telling stories to anyone who'll listen. A sculpture or a photo might spark a kid to ask about their own roots. The university, with its wraparound support, has students finishing degrees and heading back to places like the Lakota reservations to make a difference. It's a cycle. History gets shared, kids get educated, and they carry it forward. Standing Bear and Korchak didn't just want a rock with a face on it. They wanted a place where Native identity could breathe, where the next generation could stand taller because of it. The visitors helped too, spreading the word and keeping the effort funded through ticket sales and donations. It's a slow build, but it's working. The mountain might draw them in, but the culture and education make them stay. The Crazy Horse Memorial stands tall for a reason. It's not just a giant sculpture, though at 563 feet high when finished, it's hard to miss. It's a symbol of resilience, a way to push back against the wrongs done to Native peoples over the years. This isn't some side note. It's a living piece of American history. Korchak Joukowsky and Chief Henry Standing Bear didn't set out to build a tourist trap. They wanted something that said we're still here and our story matters. Every chunk of rock carved away makes that clearer. Korchak had a saying he'd bring up now and then, maybe 2 or 3 times in his life. When the legends die, the dreams end, and when the dreams end, there is no more greatness. He didn't toss that out lightly. It was his way of explaining why this mattered. Legends like Crazy Horse keep people dreaming, and those dreams fuel something bigger. Lose them, and you lose what makes a culture strong. That's what he fought for, hammer in hand, step by step up that mountain. Go see the Crazy Horse Memorial for yourself. It's still growing, aiming for that 563-foot mark, and it's worth the trip. Stand there, look up, and let it sink in. Then keep your own dreams alive. That's how greatness sticks around. Not just for Native people, but for anyone who believes in holding on to what matters. It's a story still being written, and you can be part of it. The Crazy Horse Memorial isn't just a big rock with a face on it. It's a story about resilience, identity, and the dreams Native peoples have held on to through thick and thin. This thing has been built across generations, from Chief Henry Standing Bear's first letter to the Jukowski family still carving today. It's there to honor their history and culture, a way to say these stories aren't fading anytime soon. That's the heart of it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What hit you the hardest? If this story fired you up, give it a like. And if you're into real, meaningful history like this, hit subscribe. There's more where this came from, and we'd love to have you along for it.